The next great concept that we're going to discuss is the Kano model. The Kano model classifies customer requirements along two dimensions. The first dimension is if the requirement is fulfilled or not. So if the feature is on board or not. And the second dimension is the customer satisfaction. So you can see in the middle, the customer is neutral. If you go up, the customer gets more and more satisfied. And if you go down, the customer gets more and more dissatisfied. Based on these two dimensions, you can now classify features in three basic buckets. The first bucket are those features that actually, if they are not on board, they are making the customer really dissatisfied. Yeah, we are here. So if the requirement is not fulfilled, then the customer is really dissatisfied. And if you are better in fulfilling this requirement, it just makes the customer less dissatisfied. The optimum is that they are neutral. So in other terms, that's a must-have criteria, right? So this is something your product needs to deliver to be considered at all. Yeah, because your customer expects these things to deliver. Usually they are implied, they are obvious, they're not even expressed by a customer. This is what the customer takes for granted when it comes to your product. So as a simple example, just take one of your smartphones. The basic functionality of making a phone call is something that I would consider an expected requirement. It's not something where you actually ask in the shop, is this smartphone actually able to make a call? No, that's something that you take for granted. And if it's not on board, if you can't make a call, you're really dissatisfied. And if it's on board, well, you say, well, it has to. The second type is the so-called normal requirement, which means that you have some kind of a reference point, and if your product delivers more than this reference point, well, actually the customer gets more and more satisfied the better you deliver, and below this reference point you get more and more dissatisfied. So actually this means that these are criteria that the customers usually can articulate, are very specific about that, and have clear expectations for your product. Some may even say these are the purchasing relevant criteria that the customer mentions if you ask them, why do you choose this product over another one? So let's stick with our smartphone example. So one example would maybe be the resolution of the photos you can make, or the battery life. Yeah, if you say, okay, if it's more than 1.5 days, this makes me more and more satisfied because I don't really expect that. It's fantastic if you have 2, 3, 4 days of battery life in your smartphone. But if you fall below this 1.5 day, well, this makes you more and more dissatisfied. If it's 1 day, you're a little bit dissatisfied. It's just half a day, you get more and more dissatisfied. So actually, these are the things that you as a customer use to make your purchasing decision, and you are really conscious about them, and you can articulate them. The third category is the so-called exciting requirements. These are the things that the customers do not really expect from your product. So if this feature is not on board, it does not create any kind of dissatisfaction. It just, since the customer doesn't expect it, it just doesn't cause the customer to dislike your product. However, if this feature is on board, and the more and better it is, the more excitement it creates. Yeah, meaning that these are the things that are actually not expressed, not what the customer can actually articulate, but will actually cause a lot of delight. Yeah, so that's a feature on board of your smartphone that actually you didn't expect. Yeah, so for instance, let's say an automated callback option. So if you make a call and you you don't reach the person that you wanted to reach, that the smartphone tries to reconnect after a certain period of time, and so that you do not really need to think about it again. Yeah. Or well, other features. So just look at that 10 years ago. 10 years ago, nobody wanted to, or yeah, nobody articulated the explicit need to read email on the phone. Yeah. So at that time, having an email client on your smartphone was really causing a delight. Nobody was dissatisfied if this feature was not on board, but if it was, this made people very, very satisfied. And this is the one that you aim for when going for innovation. You want to try to find out what are the features and functionalities that you can provide on your product that actually cause delight, that the customer didn't expect, that differentiates you from the competition, right? The problem is that actually everything that was an exciting requirement after a certain period of time becomes a normal requirement, which again after a certain period of time becomes an expected requirement. Yeah. So making photos with your smartphone was actually something that right at the beginning was just causing delight. You didn't imagine that a smartphone can provide really great professional picture quality. After a certain period of time, the resolution that your pictures on your smartphone could produce was a purchasing relevant criteria. You said, okay, it needs to be more than 10 megapixel and then I'm satisfied. And if it's less than that, well, that's really bad and I'm more dissatisfied. And there will be the time somewhere that you actually take it for granted that your smartphone is able to produce professional quality pictures. Yeah? So be aware of that over time, something that was an exciting requirement will probably become at the end of the day an expected requirement that you have to have on board, and you don't really differentiate from your competition in any way with this feature anymore. Yeah. So it's great, and if all of your features of your product you can map on this, and then you actually see, is there some urgency to come up with something new because you have no exciting requirements on your platform anymore, and then well, you have to generate something, and you can track this development over time to see what was an exciting requirement and became a purchasing relevant normal requirement, and what is now becoming a must-have on the product platform. So the advantage of the Kano model is, of course, that it helps you to classify all your features that you have in mind and to clarify what is the minimum viable product, the MVP. So what are the must-haves and what are the other things that I have to pack on the platform to actually be attractive to customers. It also helps you to prioritize the features, not from a technological point of view, but from a customer's point of view. To say, okay, well, this feature, maybe it's not really a great technological effort, but it's causing delight for the customer, right? So it's really helpful to prioritize your features from the lens of the customer, through the lens of the customer. You also help to build a better understanding about the time aspect related to features, yeah, to see actually what became a must-have criteria that was purchasing relevant before is an important insight so that you know where you should focus on your product platform. You also have the possibility to assess the features in a quantitative service study. So actually the classification of each of these features as an exciting or as an expected requirement is something that is not done by you within the company, but is done by running a survey and asking customers to do that. A large sample of customers, so really be sure that the result that you get is reliable and you can extrapolate your insights to your entire customer base. Of course, the Kano model has some disadvantages. First of all, it is rather limited to features and solutions. So the theory, the conceptual model of Kano, when he brought it up in the 80s, says that actually this is a great framework to classify needs. However, at that time, the clear separation between needs and features or needs and solutions was not that clear at that time. And if you do this kind of analysis, you will very quickly recognize that it's very difficult for customers to evaluate if their need is satisfied and if it's a requirement. It simply doesn't work. So because customers think in solutions, and if you want to classify certain features into these three classes, it doesn't necessarily mean that you require to go for needs. Good. Issues when asking for features that customers do not know so far, especially when they are highly innovative. So this means that if you're going to try to apply this framework for a radical new product, that's quite difficult, because the radical new features, or even if it's an entire new product, actually customers, for them it will be very difficult to assess if they actually need it, and also if they're satisfied or dissatisfied with it, because they simply don't know your radical innovation. So this rather works for product categories that are established and where you think about adding certain features and want to get a better picture about what features are mandatory, what features are causing delight. So it is definitely limited to established product categories and cannot really be applied to those more radical innovations, because the customer don't really know what your new radical innovation is about. So your Kano model is fantastic once you have generated ideas for new features for an existing product, and then want to classify which of them are mandatory, which of them are causing delight, which of them are purchasing relevant. And because this prioritization helps you then to refine your concept. So what are the minimum viable product elements? What are the must-haves that the product has to deliver? And what are the things that are causing delight? So really making it a buy for the customer. So therefore, it's great for the late idea generation stage and the early concept development stage. You can ask these kind of questions usually to Joe and Jane average. So all the customers that are this basic commitment and passive contributors, these customers are great for asking them what they think about your features and about classifying them into these three categories. And you only are interested in those Joe and Jane average customers because you want to know the broad market picture. You want to know your entire customer base so that you can actually design the product that is most attractive for the masses. Therefore, the Kano model is not really a good model for these very advanced users, these active contributors or these co-creators, because these are so atypical users. They have such a crazy background that is so different from Joe and Jane average, so from the mass market, that you can ask these questions, but the results will not be representative for your entire majority of customers. So therefore, stick with Joe and Jane average users to fill this Kano model